My name is Sebastian Copeland. I'm a polar explorer, a climate analyst, and a photographer. I never chose photography. Photography chose me when I was a kid, and it became a medium of transmission that was just a natural extension of my imaginary and, of course, what I got to see as well and experience. Photography was not something that I necessarily pursued as a career path. I just somehow had a skill at it, and that skill transmitted fairly well to advertising and commercials. And so while I was in college, I started to take photos of rock bands, and I was into music, and pretty soon it was a viable, financially rewarding, and creatively inspiring career path. But it was not my initial choice. My initial choice was either in political science or, more specifically, earth sciences. So I studied glaciology and astronomy. And as soon as I came out of college, I was hired and started working before I was really able to choose another path. And so I had an aspiration to do a PhD, but in the end, the lure of professional work took me away from academia. The shooting is a big sacrifice in the polar regions. You will suffer for it because your camera typically is in your sledge behind. You have a harness with big mittens. You're completely covered. Frost has built on your facial system, and it drips on everything, and stopping is going to make you cold because you're dressed to be warmed or at least balanced at full exertion. And as soon as you stop, this great cold, which can be 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 below, comes at you with a vengeance. So you have to pull out a big jacket, and immediately your body temperature drops. You have to take the big mittens out, and your fingers are going to suffer. You have to take the card, and the batteries are in a pocket inside your jacket under your armpit to keep them warm. And you have to open the compartment, put the battery in it, go in. You can't look through the eyepiece because the heat of your eyelid will fog the eyepiece. So everything is done with a certain sense of approximation, but knowing your equipment is critical to the result. All of this is not exactly the experience of a photographer in the normal latitudes or the more friendly shooting environments. So to rediscover the loot of your predatory experience as a photographer through just a computer screen, comfortably at home, and then, of course, through the prints, is an extraordinary privilege. And photography is that above and beyond anything else. It's to freeze one little capsule of time. Walking on Antarctica, except for the shade of the atmosphere, which presently has nitrogen and oxygen and CO2, water vapors, and argon, and it gives that sort of blue shading that we see in our atmosphere. 650 million years ago was a different shade, but short of that, there was still sunlight, there was ice everywhere, and if you walk on Antarctica, it's the closest you will feel to being on this planet long before any multicellular organism existed, because they only started developing on this planet 541 million years ago. And if you want to feel like it's another planet, then go visit the middle of Antarctica, or Greenland for that matter, because you'll pretty much get a good taste of what that was like. Well, the Inuit have anywhere from 50 to 500 words to describe ice. And so the configuration of the ice, its granularity, its shades, if it's compact or if it's light, all of those are subtle details which I don't purport to be an expert in. You have to live in that environment year in, year out, as the Inuit do, to really have a full, clear understanding of how it speaks to you. You learn to find the symbiosis with the environment that you're in, and always recognize, once again, with a nature of humility, that you're always a guest in that environment, and that at any point it could take your life away. When you're in a dangerous situation, typically you're acting on instinct and experience, and the combination is what hopefully gets you through. It's not to say that it's a foolproof plan. It's not. We've just lost recently one of my good friends to a crevasse in Greenland. He was extremely experienced, and he was retracing an expedition that I did 10 years ago, almost in exactly the same track. So it did bring a certain type of reckoning to me. But there is a place of surrendering to circumstances as well. And then there are just events that you have zero control over. So I've been charged by polar bear, for instance, and when I was alone, and dealing with this was not something that brought any fear to me in that moment. I remember it very, very clearly. But I've had many a night where in the middle of the night, I thought of what might have happened, and it has brought a certain sense of trauma, which has repeated years after years. And if you go through a crevasse field where you have to be very, very cautious of your next step, the trauma is not in that moment because you're so hyper-focused on the terrain and the shades of light and how it reflects on what might happen below you over a bridge and what sort of bridge is strong enough to support your weight and things of that nature. But after the fact, you do have cold sweats. The last person that walked to the North Pole was in 2014. And to give you an order of magnitude, since the mid-90s, essentially, there have been at least one mission going to the North Pole. And the sea ice is deteriorating at such a rapid pace. It's not just the index extent, which is what you see in satellites, but it's the volume in thickness as well. And that volume is thinning very quickly. And of course, the thinner it is, the more susceptible it is to warming events and lengthening of the spring melt and the summer seasons. The ability to be picked up or the search and rescue abilities are dramatically impaired, if not non-existent. I don't want to call it just yet a suicide mission, but we're getting close to that place. So my great heartbreak in 2017 was, it happened to be the first time I failed at a mission with 14 Arctic missions under me. And this was it's been a really difficult experience to get over. It's a monkey on my back. It's what I think about every night when I go to bed, and generally everything I think about when I wake up. It's a tough realization to think that something that you've dreamt of doing since you were a kid is not accessible anymore. That even if my kid wanted to do it, they couldn't. And so I haven't given up. I still think that I will give it a shot, but I do know that, that thin line we talked about is getting thinner. Before I answer this complex question of what we can each do in order to move the needle forward on climate change, I think it's important to contextualize it. And the way that I like to describe it is to look at the three agents of change. You have elected officials, business stakeholders, and the public. The public's in the middle because they control both. Supply and demand on one hand, which drives research and development, and elected official in the sense that policy, to some extent, is defined by the voters. With the caveat that these three agents of change are shackled at the ankle, and one can only move as fast as the slowest one. And that's the paradigm of change. Transformation doesn't happen by a singular event. It happens by change in behaviors. Your question was, what can one individual do? And one individual can be an active actor within this paradigm. To vote for the people who want to bring change, to feel engaged and invested in this issue, and that means to be curious and informed, and to buy intelligently, meaning to buy products that are promoting regeneration or sustainability, as we are calling it these days, but making sure that your life and its footprint is reduced as much as possible. I'm really inspired by people's imagination. I'm just back from the Green Tech Festival that was in Berlin, and I was really inspired by the way that people think, the solutions that they come up with, whether it's in agriculture or in agriculture, whether it's in tech, or whether it's just really simple, practical, everyday applications, whether it's in e-mobility and transportation. It's just delivering so many solutions. And those solutions are the playground of the imagination. And humans have extraordinary imagination. It's really very, very exciting to see how to stabilize a soil and enable it to absorb more hydrology or more moisture in order to create more resilient crops when that hydrology is dropping. You have to factor that, the world is losing so much land to climate change. We're presently, we've lost 1% of humanly, inhabited lands compared to 30 years ago. And by 2070, that number will be 19% of lands that are lost to climate. And so in that transition, how do we adjust the soil, or how do we make more resilient crops that are not loaded with chemicals? And this is, once again, that's the landscape of the imaginary. This is where the humans shine to a large extent, displaying the very, very best that we have. It's, our creativity, our ability to intellectually process and synthesize data, and our ability to empathize. And if you can combine these two things for one common goal, which is sustainability, or what I like to call a regeneration, then this is really what inspires me.